Well, hey there, reader friends. I'm Erica, and welcome back to my channel. And today I am going to be giving you my February 2018 wrap-up. I read 11 books this month. Well, in February, I read 11 books. Don't get too excited, because 6 of them were picture books. Does that still count? I think it counts. I'm saying it counts. The first book is Hidden Figures, The True Story of Four Black Women and the Space Race by Margot Lee Shatterly. I gave this book 4 stars. It was very informative. The illustrations were very well done. I really appreciated how this book put these women into a larger social context. So it not only discussed what these women were going through, but also the status of race relations in the US at the time that they were working with NASA, and also just the nature of where the United States was in terms of international relations with Russia at the time, although at that time it was the USSR. It was a really well done picture book. The only reason I didn't give it 5 stars was because the narrative wasn't very clear. I just thought that the story could have been told a little better. It was just a little dry. The second picture book I read was Festival of Colors by Sarishta Sehgal, and this was a picture book about the holiday of Holi, which is an Indian holiday that I knew nothing about other than, the chalky powder color stuff that is used during this holiday. The illustrations in this book were beautiful. I loved them. I also really liked how there was a wide range of color in terms of skin tone. Many different genders were represented. It was a very good introduction to Holi, and also, as a nice little plus, was, about the colors of Holi. So you could also use it as a color identification picture book. This is red, and this is blue, and this is green, which I really like. I really like that a lot. I didn't give the book 5 stars because, as a person who doesn't celebrate Holi, I would have liked just a little bit more information about the holiday itself, but that was really more a reflection of my personal reading experience and what I was expecting going into the book. Also, I just realized I might be saying it wrong. Is it Holy or Holly? Okay, so the website I went to had a lot of different pronunciations, and I don't know which one was right. So if you do celebrate this festival, please comment down below and let me know how to pronounce it properly. The book did talk about how to pronounce it, but I returned the book to the library, so I don't have it anymore. The third book I read for picture books was Be Kind by Pat Zitlo Miller, which I really, really liked. This book isn't so much a story as it is just a contemplation about what kindness means and how you can be kind to others. One thing I really appreciated was how diverse this book was in terms of race, gender, just all kinds of different people were represented in this book. Ableism, all the spectrums were recognized, and it did a really good job of talking about how kindness exists both on kind of a micro scale, so the small little day-by-day acts of kindness you could do for somebody, as well as the macro scale, as in when everyone is kind to each other, what does that world look like? I didn't give it 5 stars because there was no story, and I like my picture books to at least have a little bit of a story. I guess there was kind of a story, but it wasn't a clear, linear narrative. What can I say? I just like my picture books to have a story. Oh well. The fourth picture book I read for February was The First Step, How One Girl Put Segregation on Trial by Susan E. Goodman. This tells the forgotten story of Sarah Roberts, a young African-American elementary-age student. Sarah lived in Boston at a time when schools were still segregated, but she ended up going to a all-white school because her parents were like, that school's closer, it's a better school, we're gonna send you there. And unfortunately, she was found out and told not to go back to that school. And her father, her parents, said that's not fair, that's not right, so they sued the city of Boston in Roberts v. Boston. One thing I thought was really interesting about this story is that they ended up, spoiler alert, they ended up losing their case. They didn't win, and that was disheartening. But what I found really interesting was I didn't realize that segregation in schools was being discussed this far back in our country's history, and I definitely didn't know the story of Sarah Roberts. So for that alone, this book was fantastic. I didn't give it 5 stars because I do feel that the illustrations were difficult sometimes to figure out. There were illustrations of different prominent people within the story, but it wasn't clear who it was. Like, I kind of just had to guess. I just don't like that. The fifth picture book I read was Dear Girl by Amy Krauss Rosenthal, which I gave 5 stars because it was so good. It was so good. Basically, this book follows a young girl, and the narrative voice is telling this girl that she can be whatever she wants, and also that she doesn't have to be the same thing all the time, which I really responded to. The one I really responded to was, it said sometimes you want to be like a sparkly princess, and sometimes you just want to get muddy and play. And I was like, yes, that's right. You don't just have to be one thing all the time, ladies. You can be whatever you want, whenever you want. And that may change with time, and it may change with your mood, and that is completely okay. Don't let the world put you in a box. And the last picture book I read in February, or at least the last one I'm going to discuss here, was All Around Us by Zelina Gonzalez, and I gave it 5 stars as well. The illustrations alone in this picture book made it a 5-star read for me. They were so beautiful, and they paired so well with the text, and they created a sense of timelessness, of ancestry, of tradition, and also of just, you know, continuation, hope. It's a young person that's talking about this, and I found that really inspiring and really poignant, and I just loved it so much. So we're done with picture books, and now we're gonna go kind of on a whole nother spectrum, 180 degrees the other way, and we're gonna talk about 2 smutty books that I read in February. I'm blushing already. We all know what I'm gonna talk about. I'm gonna talk about how I read American Queen by Sierra Simone, which I gave 4 stars, and American Prince by Sierra Simone, which I gave 3 stars, which are the first 2 books in her New Camelot series. The premise of this book is that there is a woman named Greer who falls in love with this guy, and he ends up becoming the president of the United States, but in an amazing, wonderful twist, she also is in love with the vice president too, and in another twist, the vice president and president characters love each other. And so it basically was a menage story, except it was polyamorous as well. So it wasn't like, you know, a love triangle, at least not in the first one. I really enjoyed the depiction of a polyamorous relationship and the communication within that relationship, and how there wasn't really shaming of anybody for their feelings for anyone else. That was something in the first book, American Queen, that I thought was done really well. Unfortunately, that wasn't carried through into American Prince, and by the time I finished American Prince, I decided I wasn't going to continue with the series. Part of this also is due to the format of the book. The book does what a lot of romance and smut books in particular seem to do, which is that you have a current, present timeline, and then going back and forth to the past and what happened in the past. And particularly during the second book, I just didn't care about the past plot line at all. I don't know why. I should have. I really enjoy Ash and Embry and wanted to know their story, but at the same time, I didn't enjoy going back and revisiting their history. I just wanted to stay in the present timeline, and it got so irritating for me, plus some of the other twists that came in towards the end of the book, that I was just like, I'm not going to continue. I'm not enjoying this as much, and that open communication, acceptance tone that was in the first book didn't carry through to the second book. So yeah, I'm gonna stop, but they were really fun. I recommend them if you like that kind of story. I finally have a book to show you guys. The 9th book that I read for February was Honor Girl by Maggie Thrash. I gave it 3 stars. I thought that this story was very interesting. It follows the main character, Maggie, who goes to a camp for girls, and in the process of attending camp, explores her sexuality, that she's bisexual. I have to admit, though, I was pretty disappointed with this book. The illustrations, they weren't very good. And I understand that we have different standards for graphic novels and for different styles of illustrations. Like this very sketchy cartoon style can be done really well. I think that Raina Telgemeier does an amazing job with that style. I just get really annoyed that none of the characters have like pupils. Like they just have white eyes, and that just annoyed me. I didn't like that at all. But there were also times like, okay, so here's a good one. If you look at this one, like there's no accuracy in kind of where the bones are in this illustration and things like that. But then in this one, in this next one with the hands, it's clearly very, there is anatomy stuff that's accurate there. And so I think that going back and forth, some of them were very sketchy and some of them were a little more like thought put into it, I guess, or time, was frustrating for me as a reader. I also really didn't like the ending. I thought the ending was abrupt and didn't feel like an ending. And while yes, this is a memoir, you still need to have a sense of story and how it ends, or at least how this chapter is done. Overall, I think this story would have been much better as like an actual memoir, or maybe an illustrated chapter book, because the artwork wasn't strong enough to support the story, and that made the story feel kind of not as important as it is. Disappointed. Continuing on with this theme of disappointment, we have the 10th book that I read this past month, which I listened to as an audiobook, which is The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert, which everyone on BookTube loves, and I really did not enjoy. Don't come at me, guys, but I don't understand the hype around this book at all. I suppose I should start with kind of a disclaimer. I'm not a big Alice in Wonderland fan, and so because it kind of had that Alice in Wonderland feel, that made it less enjoyable to me personally, since I don't enjoy that type of framework for a tale. The other thing that I really struggled with was I didn't care about the main character. I didn't care about Alice. I thought she was entitled. I thought she wasn't developed at all. I thought she didn't grow at all as a character either. Even when the big reveal happened, like, that didn't seem to change her, really. I wanted more of the dark stories. The other main issue I had with this story, with the Hazelwood, was the pacing. I felt that it took too long for us to get to the hinterlands. I felt that the, like, traveling to get there was overdone and ended up cutting off at the knees the fact that scary things were happening. There was no sense of urgency, and I didn't sense this, like, we have to get there now attitude to it. This isn't to say that I think that this was a terrible, terrible book. It wasn't. I think that the premise was really interesting. I thought that the idea of this dark, like, fairyland that's real and these parallel worlds, and the fact that things are coming out of the worlds, and, like, the monsters, I mean, the stories too, they were great and creepy. So there were definite pluses to this book. I just think that it wasn't realized as well as it could have been. And I won't be continuing with the series. I can tell you that right now. I was too frustrated. And the final book I read in February was The Financial Diet, A Total Beginner's Guide to Getting Good with Money by Chelsea Fagan, which they have a YouTube channel, which I'll link down below, called The Financial Diet, which I've watched for a long time. So when I saw this book was coming out, I was like, yes, please let me read it. I am your complete and total target audience. I am a female. I am a millennial, and I have a really weird and tense relationship with my personal finances. I gave this book 5 stars, partly because I was completely the target audience, like I said. That made it probably just a 3-star book right off the bat. I also feel like I didn't go in with unrealistic expectations for what this book would be. And I've seen some reviews on Goodreads from people who were frustrated with the book because it's not actually a how-to guide, and I think that that might have been a mismarketing thing. It's more of a lifestyle guide, and providing mechanisms and ways to remove the taboo around discussing money and personal finance, and, you know, giving you a little support and saying, yeah, you should ask those questions. You should know about how your retirement fund is looking and how it works. You have the right to discuss your compensation during your, job offer and to negotiate that. You also should have a budget, and here's why you should have one. I also really loved the design of this book and how it was made. I loved how the chapters were broken up with little profiles by women, and that there were other things that you wouldn't normally think about in, like, a financial book, like recipes and, staples for your house when you get your first apartment or your first house, and, like, the tools you need to have. Those kinds of things I really, 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 really appreciated. They just made the book more fun and less depressing, because when I consider my personal finances, I tend to get depressed. So those are all the books that I read in February. So what do you guys think? Do you want me to keep discussing picture books in my wrap-ups? Because if you don't, if you feel like that's not as important, maybe I could do it a different way, because it does add quite some time to my wrap-ups since I read so many picture books. But anyhow, thanks for watching, guys. If you have anything else you'd like to say, feel free to leave a comment below. Subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you next time. Bye! The 4th picture book I read was The First Step, How One Girl Put Segregation on Trial by Susan E. Goodman.